many of you with us today, I want to say a few words to put in context the turmoil and the demonstrations and the violence that we're now seeing in the Middle East and in North Africa. I think we should be clear with ourselves that the people living in those countries, in Bahrain, in Yemen, in Syria, in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Libya, in Jordan, that they have the right to the same aspirations of democracy and human rights that we do. And that it's our job to support them in that struggle. It's going to be a very difficult road, and we should have no assumptions about how the revolution in Egypt will turn out, or Tunisia, or more particularly in Libya today, where there's active military fighting. But I want to point out two regions of the world that in the last decade or two have undergone similar dramatic changes for the better. Many of us got started in Amnesty in the 1970s, and the countries we were focusing on were Chile and Argentina and Brazil and Paraguay and Uruguay. In every one of those countries, the military was asserting control, or a military strongman was asserting control. We learned the word desaparecido. People were disappearing, and tens of thousands of people were disappearing in countries like Argentina and Chile and Brazil in particular. The very first urgent action Amnesty ever issued was on a mathematician who got into trouble in Brazil in the early 1970s. Now those countries, we call that the Southern Cone of Latin America, they have their challenges like any society, like any democracy. But the fact is that from the point of view of human rights, there is no question that things are dramatically better in those countries in the Southern Cone. And we played a role by documenting human rights issues, by demonstrating in the streets, by being in front of embassies, by writing our letters, and creating a sense of moral isolation around those governments. And look at Eastern Europe. Who would have guessed that the ascension of a younger General Secretary of the Communist Party in Moscow in 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev, would lead not only to the breakup of the Soviet Union, but the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the establishment of more democratic governments throughout Eastern Europe, to see the unification of Germany into a united and democratic country. There is no telling, and I'm hardly saying today, that the countries of the Middle East will enjoy a similar and consistent democratic renaissance. The entrenchment of these dictatorships, one country after another, will be very difficult to move away from. And it will be very difficult to instill democratic values or democratic institutions. But we have to insist both on the governments that emerge and on our own government to support these democratic values that we are so quick to profess at home and often so hesitant to support in other parts of the world. And that's the tension our own government is facing today. We supported Mr. Mubarak for those decades in Egypt. What did we think was going to happen? He's an old man in his 80s. Were we going to see the North Korean solution? He gets to appoint his son to become the next president? That's what happened in Syria. Hafez al-Assad became sick, he died. His son is now the president of Syria. Was there a democratic election? Of course not. So we should not have any illusions about how easy this will be or what the outcome will be. But we should be insistent on our own government and on the governments that emerge, that looking at what emerges through the prism of human rights will determine the level of our support and the level of our enthusiasm for whatever government emerges. It could well be better. It could well be more difficult. And we should have that in mind as we look at what's going on in those countries. Anyway, I just wanted to say a word or two about that this morning. We'll be focusing on other countries today, but it's wonderful to have all of you with us. Thank you very much.